Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today I spoke with Alex, and Alex is a copywriter. And one of the things we discussed in this episode is how AI can be effective and where you need to leave AI alone. Hello, Alex. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you very much for coming on. How are you?
Thank you for having me, David. I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good. And I just enjoyed our little reminisce about the history of London and my times there when I was young enough to be called young. And it's an interesting history and a great. It's definitely a great place to live. So, what exactly? Just explain to everybody what it is you actually do for a living.
Sure. So I am a acquisitions copywriter. So basically, my job is to write copy that turns strangers, people who don't know you, into leads and customers. And typically that happens through like paid social. So if you're, say, running an advertising campaign on Facebook and you want to collect leads, or you want to get people to buy a book, or you want to get people to buy, let's say you've created a mini course, you want them to buy the mini course, and maybe build your email list that way, and turn them into clients for your offers on the back end. Maybe you have let's say you're an advertising agency, maybe you run campaigns for clients, then you want to send people into those services. So basically, I just write copy that helps businesses get customers.
Okay, so when you think back, whether it be advertising, copywriting, or marketing, when do you think you first noticed it?
In terms of,
like when I think of old adverts as a child, I'm now able to see kind of the genius behind them, because as a kid growing up in the 80s, adverts were a big thing, and you'd be singing them on your way walking to school, and you don't realize now until now, like I'll talk to someone like yourself, just what a powerful concept that was, because there's kids on the bus singing adverts because they were like these little pop tunes, and of course that's putting everyone's product out there, and you just now I look at that, so that's so genius. And you see that in the modern world with your TikTok and your Instagram trends with music, and it's just, so when you look back, when do you think you first become aware, like, oh, actually?
Well, if I think about it, when I was a kid, I guess I had a very neutral, well, I had very much like a kid's view of advertising. It was very just taking things at face value. I'd look at an ad and it was just selling the thing. I didn't think, oh, this is a good ad or this is a bad ad. It was just, oh, this is cool. I like the video that they've made or something. But nowadays, when I'm looking at ads and at marketing in general, especially because being in London, I take public transport and the overground and the underground quite a lot, and you're sitting for a while and you get a chance to just like look at all the ads that are up on the delivery of the carriages, and that's when I find myself analyzing it a lot more these days, now that I'm very much in this world. Like, oh, I don't think that's a great ad, right? That's a great ad there. I think they could have done this here. I think they probably should have worded it like this. And so I don't know if I can pinpoint a real turning point, but I do remember that in school, writing and kind of English language and literature, where you're writing essays and stuff, that's something I kind of gravitated a bit more towards naturally. I was never very much good at maths. I'm still not very good at maths. But Same. Writing was something, yeah. Well, yeah, then exactly.
My gift for talking is still relevant today.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's arguably maybe the more important one in our industry. But yeah, so I was never much good at maths, but I was okay at writing, and I felt I'd gravitate. I could waffle quite well.
Yeah.
And then when I went into university, I actually went into studying media production. I did that for about a year, and I was like, this isn't really for me. And around about the same time, I started getting interested in kind of like business and marketing and consumer psychology. And as I got more interested in that world, the more it kind of meshed with this this ability for writing that I kind of had. And so that's what led me down to copywriting. And I suppose then that was the turning point where I started really ingraining myself more into the world of advertising and marketing and how messages are received by consumers. So.
You just said something in the middle of that, which I'd like to dig into a little bit, if we may, because I think it's sometimes I don't like using the phrase more important, but because I'm somebody's like I remember, I'm going to go off on a little transition here.
Sure.
I remember years ago when I think I was working on the front desk of one of the BMW dealerships, and we had this like little test thing they used to do for training. It's like mark everything from a scale of 1 to 10 of what's the most important thing. And of course, the people would be sitting there going, well, the most important thing is this. And okay. And actually the answer of everything should be 1. Nothing should be prioritized over anything else, because everything should be treated equally as important. Yeah. Even if it doesn't seem significant, anything that takes away the cog stops the entire machine working. So, and the reason I put that little caveat in, because you said something about consumer psychology, and I wonder, when you said that, I was thinking about, actually, yeah, sometimes I think it's just as important that before you start trying to understand good advertising, good copywriting, good marketing, you really need an education in consumer psychology.
Well, the funny thing is, when I think about copywriting and advertising in general, but especially with copywriting, a lot of people think that to be a good copywriter, you need to be good at writing. And I guess that does come into it a little bit. If you know how to turn a phrase or use certain words, sure, you might be able to turn ideas into words more easily. But I really find that the big kind of driving factor behind good copywriting, behind good advertising, behind good marketing is ideas, good ideas. Because there's even, I mean, to go on a little tangent, there's even kind of research that shows that you should try and write copy for about the 7th grade level, which is about year 6 in kind of UK standards. And that's not because to say that your readers won't understand the words that you're using, or to infer that your readers are dumb or anything like that. It's purely because when you use simpler language, it takes less kind of cognitive processing in order to understand what you're saying, which is to say it reduces the friction of you delivering your message. And that's important because whenever you increase the friction in any kind of sales conversation or advertisement or marketing campaign, you increase the friction and conversion goes down. So friction increases, conversions decrease. So using simpler language helps you to convey that message more easily and make sure that there's as little friction as possible so that you can get your customers interested. Tying back to what we were just talking about, which I've forgotten exactly.
It's the consumer psychology side.
Yes. We were talking about ideas and consumer psychology. So copywriting is just about kind of like good ideas, and advertising is just about good ideas. So you don't need to necessarily, I remember how I was going to tie this in. You don't necessarily need to be a good writer in order to be a good copywriter, a good advertiser, because, you don't need flowery language. It can be quite simple because it's just about ideas. And so one of the most beneficial things that I find you can do as an advertiser or a marketer, and this is something that is kind of, I believe David Ogilvy said, who's kind of like one of the, let's say, grandfathers of modern advertising in the golden age of the 50s and 60s and what have you of advertising. He said one of the most important things you can do is this act of world consumption, which is to just say, read books, go outside, people watch movies, watch TV shows, just observe the world around you, because that's probably the best education you'll get about what makes people tick, and therefore what ideas you can then bring into your advertising, into your marketing, so that you can best kind of reach the consumer and join that conversation that they're already having in their mind. So that's really what I think kind of comes into the consumer psychology part of it. Is there's not really a lot that you can do to study consumer psychology except to just people watch and observe people and see what makes them tick.
Because that's interesting, because again, it's people are always looking for the magic pill, the one hit. It's like, oh, if I could just get this one hit wonder, if I could just get this magic pill, if I could just, without understanding that, one, if people knew how to do that, everyone would do it, That's why a one-hit wonder is exactly that. That's why a unicorn video on TikTok or Instagram is called a unicorn, because they're so rare that no one ever sees them. And going viral is, it's not the science that people think it is because you do get the odd unicorn video that nobody understands why. Well, they kind of understand why it goes viral, but not enough that, okay, I'll pay you to get a viral video for me. No, because all you can really do is pump a huge amount of money into it to get it seen on every platform. It still doesn't mean it will go viral. And I find often when I listen to people or I'm talking to people, when you start breaking it down, it's that thing that you were saying about, which I think is a really good analogy, about pitch it at this level to keep it as simple as possible. Because where people often trip up is trying to be smart and trying to be clever and trying to be sophisticated, and you're just like, that's why it's missed the market.
It's so interesting you say that as well, because there's kind of research that shows that the average social media user is so distracted by like all these things going on in their feed, and maybe they're looking at their phone whilst they're watching TV or whilst the radio's on in the background, whatever. They're so distracted that they have essentially the same kind of awareness capacity as someone who is drunk, right? So essentially, social media users who are scrolling through Instagram are as attentive as someone who is drunk, which is to say, it kind of goes back to that point. The more that your message is kind of convoluted, or where you try and be clever, you try and strip away that simplicity in the desire to kind of be a little bit funny or comical or clever, then the harder you're making it for yourself and for your consumer to understand your message. So that's something to keep in mind, is that basically when you're putting your ideas out there, keep it as simple as possible, because if you can't, if someone can't understand it when, like, if you're in a boardroom and you're all examining this idea, and you can't really understand the idea, then there's no way that a social media user who is effectively drunk using social media is going to understand that idea like that either.
Yeah, that's something to ponder, because, like you say, there's, if somebody, because I think that's also a problem for anybody in any industry. Because you know your product so well, you're not able to see the flaws in your own message, because you understand it inside and out. Yeah. And I suppose that's where the gift comes in, of being able to simplify it so anybody could understand it.
And I think this is also where kind of AI might come into the conversation, and how AI can be used.
Nice segue.
Thanks.
That's marketing skills for you right there. That's your copywriting. That's it there.
But this is kind of where AI might come into the conversation, and should you use AI as a copywriter? Will AI replace copywriters? And I think what's really important to understand about the role of a copywriter is that the role of a copywriter, or at least a good one, should be that they're, as I said, the writing. Okay, maybe you have good writing skills, but that's not the most important skill. One of the most important skills you can have as a copywriter, as any advertiser really, is to be a really good researcher. And when you're talking about, okay, how can you convey this idea in a way that's going to resonate with the customer, a lot of it comes down to the concept called awareness, the awareness spectrum, which is to say, how aware is your customer that they have a problem? And it's on a scale of 1 to 5. Level 1 is they are completely unaware that they have a problem, right? They don't even know, like you're trying to sell hydration tablets to someone that doesn't even realize that they need to stay hydrated to prevent migraines or something. They just don't know they have a problem. They don't know why. They couldn't even see why your product would be necessary. So that's level 1. They're unaware. Level 2 is that they're now problem aware. So now they know they have a problem, but they don't know how to solve it, right? So that's level 2. Level 3 is they're solution aware. Now they know the kind of solution that they might need. Let's say you're hungry, you want a packet of crisps, you go into the supermarket, but you don't know what crisps you're going to get, right? That's level 3. Unaware, problem aware, solution aware. Now we're on to level 4, product aware. So now they know your product exists. Right now, you go into the shop, you see the tube of Pringles, you say, sour cream and onion Pringles, that's the one I want, right? So that's product aware. That's level 4. Level 5 is now they're most aware. Now they know of their problem, the solution, the product, your particular product, and how it's going to solve it. Now they just need a good reason to buy, right? So maybe it's the Pringles are on deal or something, or on a discount, so you buy those Pringles. And that's something that when you try and use AI, even as a research tool, it won't be able to, you won't get it to easily tell you what level of awareness your particular customer is at. And that's important because you want to be able to join the conversation at the point where the customer is having it in their mind, right? You don't want to try and sell a solution to someone who's, a level 3 kind of thing to someone who's at a level 1. They don't even realize they have the problem yet. So you can't speak to them when they're at that level 1 stage. You have to speak to them in stories, because stories are ways of showing kind of how examples of how concepts connect, and it's a way of simplifying complex ideas. And that's where the role of a copywriter can come in and say, okay, well, let's figure out what stage of awareness this person is at, and let's do the research to find how we can best connect our ideas with where they're at that time, and join that conversation. And if you try and use AI to do that, say, how can you sell ice to a polar bear or something? If you ask AI, it might come up with some generic ideas. It might say, oh, well, you need to do XYZ. But that, as a copywriter, and as I say, as any advertiser, your role is to kind of come in and be that researcher and fill in the gaps where AI can't just give you a simple answer, because it's not a simple answer. We're complex people, and you're trying to sell things to complex beings. So you need to be able to have that understanding of where kind of your customer is in that buying process. So that was kind of a long, rambly way of saying AI can be kind of helpful for research, but mostly it's still reliant on the person actually using the AI and knowing what to look for.
I mean, my own experience with AI, when there was a point, Carlton was the same, him and I were on a project together. Mm-hmm. And we were using AI to write some of the copy for early YouTube videos when it first we were using ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. And initially, like when we first started, it was just like, okay, this is just written 1,000 words in 20 seconds. I can't, I can't compete with that. And but it didn't take long before, as it evolved and the way the AI works, that pretty much every copy was turning out almost the same. And I was spending almost as many times trying to rewrite questions to get a different angle to see what ChatGPT would chuck out. It's like, do you know what? I'll just write the copy myself now.
Yeah. And that's I mean, look, I don't know what AI is going to be like 5 or 10 years from now. I can only assume that it will get better and better. But
I don't think it will.
Yeah, we don't really know, but even just for now, it's exactly what you say. You can. It's kind of like that uncanny valley thing where you can, there's like robots that are very human-like, but you can still kind of tell they're robots, not humans, and you can kind of get the same thing from AI. You see it actually on LinkedIn a lot, because I think what's popular on LinkedIn, what seems to be popular right now, is that excuse me, people will comment on your post, and it will look like a genuine engagement, a genuine comment, and then you read it, and it basically is just like summarizing exactly what your post said, but in slightly different words. And it's like, clearly you've just taken my post, put it through AI, and said, come up with a thought and insightful comment about this particular post.
Exactly.
And
because AI loves the words thoughtful and insightful.
It uses these. It's almost a very academic.
It's like a generic terms for things. It is. It's corporate's a very good way of describing some of the things that used to come back. It'd be like, join us on this journey of discovery. Well, it's like, what the hell?
Yeah, it's just corporate speak. And even if you try and simplify it, I think one of the things that AI kind of struggles with a little bit is like using metaphors, and say, for example, if I'm trying to explain a complex idea to you, and it's your first time explaining it, or your first time hearing it, and my first time explaining it to you, it might be really difficult to explain it in the terms that I might use to, explain it to a team member who already knows how it works. So what I might do is I might use a metaphor. It's like doing this. Uh, it's like let's say a car. When the first car, it's like a horse,
Mm.
but that can run forever or whatever. Um, it's like a carriage without a horse, I think. And something that humans can do very kind of naturally is something like that. They can tie it to common experiences that we have as humans, and things in our daily life. Finding a fiver in our coat pocket is like finding out that you can save money on your car insurance or whatever. But AI isn't as good at that because it doesn't have that very, it's a robot, it's a computer, it doesn't have that same human shared experience that is very unique and kind of niche to us and our world view. So yeah, I think that AI, at least at the moment, you can generally tell when something's written by AI, and it might help you to formulate those ideas. And I particularly like it as a research tool, but like you say, to write copy, you almost spend as much time trying to engineer the prompt and then edit what it puts out than you would have saved
Yeah.
if you just wrote the copy for
I
yourself.
still think sometimes it's I haven't been on it for a long time, to be fair, but it got to a point where I was finding it very useful to just type in different questions or different YouTube titles based on something, just to get some feedback of. So if I phrase it this way,
Mm-hmm.
like like say something like, write me a YouTube description for what's a well-known route for discipline to help me lose weight versus what's a way to be motivated to lose weight versus what are the most successful routes to lose weight, and just the same sort of phrase of questions, but it could sometimes, and that's when I started to notice it was, oh, you're just spinning the same answers through the tumble dryer and chucking them out again. There used to be a massive clash in the differences, and then as kind of AI evolved, interestingly, somebody once described it to me is that AI isn't really thinking for itself. What AI is very successful at doing, it's basically accessing the internet and seeing what everyone has written, and then plagiarizing it, for want of a better term. And I know there was a couple of incidents with ChatGPT where people have taken them to court, or were going to take them to court, because AI had blatantly plagiarized their work.
Yeah, and that's the dangerous thing is, AI spits out this thing which for all intents and purposes to you seems like original content, but you don't know where and which parts of that content have been lifted, sometimes, as you say, directly from somewhere else. So it really can open you up to really problematic. Well,
yeah. And it was interesting sort of to see that happening in real time over a few months as a ChatGPT got better and better. That actually become less efficient because it started to generalize more and more and more. And ultimately, I think where people like you and I will always win out is, if you're, I'm going to stereotype here for the sake of the journey. If you're a Neanderthal, like Carlton would describe me as a bit of a knuckle dragger, and or if you're a redneck versus someone who's a vegan, right? AI will lean towards one of those things. It's never going to be fanatical. It's never going to be a fanatical vegan. It's never going to be a fanatical redneck pickup driver. It's never going to be a Neanderthal knuckle dragger like me who just loathes technology whilst using it. So it's never going to understand those concepts of personal beliefs and values. And in therapy and stuff, that they'll bang on about, oh, that's why you got to do your shadow work, because you can evolve, and to understand. Yeah, which is all completely true, but it's also what defines us. So if AI hasn't had that traumatic experience, and you and I could have equal traumatic experiences, but because of the way our personalities work, we'll have different outcomes of how they're dealt with. There's a thing they discovered after there used to be a psychological theory that about you're a product of your environment, and whilst there is a lot of truth in that, they also discovered over a period of time, because there was enough identical twins that were studied over like their lifetimes, like these grow up in the same household, everything is literally identical, yet because they have different personalities, their lives are completely different, and one of them can be the glass is half empty, the other can be the glass is half full. Same womb, same embryo, same cell. There is nothing separate about them in terms of biology and the environment they grew up in, but they still have complete opposite personalities.
Well, I think it's a very important thing to take note of as well, especially in today's environment, because it's so easy to get online and so easy to start a business online, so easy to position yourself online as an expert these days. It's never been easier to just like put stuff out there and see what who reads it. And what that means is it's become a very crowded landscape. And the difficulty with AI, as you just mentioned a second ago, is that it has a very neutral tone. It struggles to carve out a personality of itself. Well, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
When you think about how crowded this landscape is, and how, especially with things like personal brands, how drawn people are to certain personal brands. You might prefer this person because of their values on this and the way they speak about this and the way they use humor. Another person might hate that, right? So people are drawn to different personalities. When you use AI, you run the risk of stripping that personality away. And sometimes, in some cases, you might have two products or services which are exactly the same. They are incomparable. Sometimes maybe, not incomparable. They are indistinguishable. Sometimes deep down to even the level of price. Maybe they're the exact same price. Well, sometimes the defining factor as to what makes you choose this product over that product is the way that you resonate with this person over that person. You maybe like their tone of voice. You maybe like their humor. You maybe like there's just some part of their presence, their demeanor, their personality, which is attractive to you. And even though the two products are exactly the same, one might even be a little bit more expensive, but you might say, hey, I'm going to go with the more expensive one because I actually resonate more. It might be more expensive, but I resonate more with that person. And when you use AI, you run that risk of stripping out that personality, which can be that differentiating factor that makes someone choose your business, your products over someone else. So
one of the things and I think it's leaning into this as well, is I have a theory that obviously time will prove whether or not it's speed correct. So, like all things, when something new technology comes out, that is phenomenal. Let's not forget AI is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
But really, there is a lot of people jumping on a bandwagon. There is a lot of it because it's done by tech guys who pretty much control social media and the internet in terms of, they're the ones that created it, and this is our new baby. Mm-hmm. And they promote it and talk about it so hard and encourage everybody to use it that people are, already talking about, you already have AI OnlyFans, AI band, AI actors, and all of these things, but which is great. But do you know what it doesn't have? It doesn't have Tom Hanks' longevity, because he's going to evolve and get older, and as he's getting older, he plays new characters. And when you think about bands that you first started listening to as a teenager, some of them no longer resonate with you. Some of them you can't wait to see them on tour again for the 10th time. Mm-hmm. And those experiences, an AI substitute, for want of a better term, no matter how good it becomes, I'm never going to get excited because you and I are going to talk about something in 20 years from now about, do you remember when we all got in that minibus and we drove to such and such and it was our first first time we'd ever got a concert together, and you were a friend of so and so, and I was his mate, and that's how you and I met. And now we've done 5 concerts, on like 2 different continents, because we're just crazy fans. It's never going to have that experience. Whereas when you're a band, like I just seen something on the internet today on Instagram. It's somebody's story, and it was the Killers who are touring at the moment, and I'm no mad Killers fan, but I shared it on my story because they put the last minutes of the England semi-final. So you've seen it, haven't you?
I did see this, yeah. And then they played Mr. Brightside, and
and the fireworks went off, and the entire sort of like, and then somebody panned around, and there's thousands of people at this concert, all celebrating the final whistle of the England game. And like you said, they had the fireworks going off, Mr. Brightside. AI is never going to experience that. It's never going to do it.
No, and I think there's always going to be a desire to have the real thing, right? Like you kind of balk at the idea of paying £400 or $400 or whatever to go to a concert and then just have like this digitized form of. I mean, I know there's something like there's a I don't want to name it, but there's a you might know it. But there's this particular concert that has been quite popular over the past couple of years of a very famous Swedish pop band, where they
AI regenerated them.
Yeah, and apparently it's very good. I've not been to it, but I think people are always going to want, like, rather than having just like digitized, they're going to want that feeling of being able to go to the concert, be in the front row, touch Mick Jagger's hand as he's like moving through the crowd and giving everyone a high five. There's always that like real, very real, I guess it just comes down to connection. People want that connection with other people. And if you're kind of doing this one-sided thing where you go to a concert and it's digitized, and you can try all you like to imagine that that's actually Mick Jagger on the stage, or that's this singer, that singer. But if it's an AI representation, it feels somewhat disingenuous, at least to me. It takes away some of that magic. And so I think, like you said with Tom Hanks, as he gets older and as he ages, I think people are always going to want to see the real Tom Hanks acting as opposed to just an AI reproduction of him acting. And one thing I should say as well is I say all this, and it might make me sound really anti-AI. I'm not anti-AI. In fact, I think it's, as a copywriter, and as an advertiser, I think it's a good tool, but just not for every part of the process. It has its uses in some parts of the process, just not every part of the process.
No, I mean, you and I both agreed along this route that we wholeheartedly believe AI is an amazing tool. But as somebody who kind of like, as I often talk about, grew up in the 80s, the 90s, and the noughties and stuff, typewriters were a phenomenal tool as well. We thought cordless phones rocked the world. and it's just, this is the advancement of technology. The difference is that AI, because of the people that created it and their connections to all of the tech company, that they were able to put it out there for everybody immediately, or almost immediately. And but the same thing happened with colour TVs versus black and white TVs. And then eventually colour TVs, the first person in the street to have a TV was phenomenal. The first person to have a colour TV was phenomenal. The first person to have a colour TV with a remote, that was phenomenal. Now people have stopped buying TVs because they got tablets and laptops and phones, and they're having to come up with these crazier TVs that they're probably only 2 steps away from doing the laundry and the washing up for you, because it's the only way they can get you to buy a TV now.
Yeah.
And once upon a time, there was a day when nobody had seen a TV, and then a week later, it was on the news. I mean, we used to have, grew up in the we used to have a program called Tomorrow's World, where it used to predict potential inventions, and it would go around all of these shows and it's like, oh, these people are working on this, these people are working on that. And the reason that show faded out and stopped, it's not because it wasn't relevant, it's because why do I have to wait to watch Tomorrow's World when it's on YouTube today? I don't need to wait until Friday. Things like things like Top of the Pops, where artists we got less and less popular for one reason. I can just go on the internet and access them immediately. And AI, for everything it's doing, it's actually, I was about to say gimmick, and that's too derogative because it's not true. But it's an incredibly efficient and effective tool when used appropriately and correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it's a good tool for research. It's always a good idea to fact check what comes out of it, but it's kind of a little bit more precise for Google. Like I remember for a few months ago, I was writing some copy for, I'm not going to give away too many details of the client, but it was a legal firm. And I wanted some stats on kind of just like law and the legal profession in general. And so I asked this question, and it kind of spat out some research. And if I was to try and do that research on Google, I would have to try and think of a question that's kind of what I'm looking for, and then I would have to sift through articles and see if I could find that, percentage or statistic that I'm looking for. Whereas with AI, it can find those articles and pull that statistic out and just present it to me, immediately. And of course, I can go and check that that's all correct and all that kind of stuff. But it can really help to condense that research process, and it's a little bit like having like an information porter. I don't know what the term for that would be, but you could say to them, like your own personal researcher, hey, I'm looking for information on this. Could you go and find that for me? Comes back and brings you that information. I also find it's a good tool for refinement, right? If I've written something, if I've written a sentence and it feels a little bit clunky and cumbersome, I can say, and I really can't think of how to kind of condense it down. I can say, hey, AI, could you try and make this more concise? And sometimes it'll spit out something really good. Sometimes it'll spit out something awful. But you can kind of pick and choose. You don't have to use what AI gives you. And so it does have its place in the research process. But I think sometimes it can, like we mentioned earlier, sometimes it's just quicker to do the task yourself rather than trying to engineer a prompt to get AI to do it for you and then tweaking what comes out on the other side.
I think that's probably the best way to view AI. In terms of learning about how to engage with it, is be very mindful of the tool you want it to be to get the best results from it. Because like anything in life, you don't try beating in a nail with a paintbrush, and it's making sure that when you're using AI, that you understand what it is you're trying to achieve from it, not just because it makes sense, but actually because that's when AI becomes phenomenally effective, when you give it really good information to get, like you said, when you were searching for stats that would have been difficult to get off Google, AI will spit those facts out for you because it'll do all of that. I think that's a really good way. It's a porter that goes and gets it for you. It's like an amazing concierge service, but you need to know what question you're asking for, what service you want from it. Maybe we should do some marketing for AI. The best concierge service for 2024.
That would be a cool idea. So we were talking about a second ago about oh no, go ahead.
No, because I think I was going to come back to, I think I cut you off earlier when you was about to say something.
No, I was just thinking about when you're talking about like when landline phones came in and all this, and you had Tomorrow's World, and it made me think a little bit about, have you seen those I think it's like a comic strip almost from a newspaper back in the 1900s or something, and it said what the world will look in the year 2000, what it'll look like in the year 2000. It was like people like flying around with like almost like jetpacks with like propellers on their back and stuff. And you look at it and you're like, okay, that's totally crazy, but also it's not that different to putting people in a plane and having them fly across country. So like you look at all these things, you look at this comic strip and it's like, okay, these are totally absurd imaginations of what the world will look like, but actually they're not that far off from what we have now.
Yeah, well, because that's the thing, is because some of those things, like you say, they didn't know about jetpacks because nobody had invented a jetpack, nobody had invented the plane, but they were starting to experiment with helicopters to try and like, if I do this with fans and stuff like that. I can't remember who it was. I can't remember who the legend was or something, but basically,
was it Da Vinci who did the helicopters?
Yeah, Da Vinci had already done the helicopters, but there was someone, I'm sure it was around that kind of maybe Renaissance period. Historians forgive me for what I'm about to annihilate, but I can still see this image of somebody, and that basically, I'm sure it's the myth of the one that tried to fly to the sun, and
Icarus.
yeah, was it he glued some feathers and stuff like that, and jumped off a building and fell to his death.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I think it was a guy in Paris or something. He jumped off the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, there was him.
To,
Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So there's all these, and he fell to his death. Yeah,
yeah,
and yeah, there's that. And there's all of these through history where we've tried to replicate something before the technology was available and before we understood, like in that case, just the aerodynamics and thermodynamics. It turns out the reason that birds can soar is because they know thermodynamics and they get under the hot air currents. We didn't know nothing about hot air currents until the Wright brothers eventually invented a plane, and then people started flying and planes started getting bouncing around because it turns out there's like air currents and thermal dynamics that come into play.
yeah.
But we imagined all of these things with no technology and no experience. And again, these learning developments, AI can't compete with that. It's never going to, going back to the killers and Mr. Bright said, they're never going to be able to understand that maybe if that team does that, that's a human experience. That's because they're football fans. That's because they're England fans. It's just like, but that they would also know that if they were touring Holland, don't do that.
Yeah. And this kind of, to take things full circle, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this chat, world consumption and just people watching, and consumer psychology is really just about knowing the human condition and being able to connect to other people and examining what you like, what makes you tick, and kind of questioning, okay, well, why does that make me feel this way? Why does that make someone else feel that way? And it's just understanding or trying, I guess you'll never fully understand, but trying to understand the human condition. And that's something which I don't know, no matter how good AI does, I don't know if it will ever be able to fully do.
I don't, again, I think AI for me falls into the color TV analogy. Do you know what I mean? Where if you think about in terms of consumption and how it's used, the concept of television was born from silent movies that were only seen in cinemas. And then they started, there used to be a pianist in the cinema to play the soundtrack for you. And then they managed to put sound onto a film so you could just hear it from speakers. And then eventually somebody was like, well, we can put this in your house. And then somebody eventually was like, well, what if we can do it live? And then somebody was like, well, what if we can make it color? And it kept evolving to the point where Steve Jobs was like, what if I could put it in your pocket? And now, from that simple concept of a mixture, I suppose, of vinyl, because Steve Jobs obviously started off with downloading music before we come up with the iPhone. It's that combination of making it more and more user-friendly, more and more accessible, that eventually what started off as a cinema screen and a vinyl record is now on a phone. But it's all about just me being able to have it it's convenience. It's always convenience ultimately. And I think AI has fallen into, this is the most convenient, blah, 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 whatever, until you and I noticed it's not personalized anymore. The success of this conversation that you and I have had actually started before we started the podcast, because you live near Dalston. And I said, I know that area because of X, Y, and Z. And we had this whole conversation about the time that I had, and I was excited to talk to you about it, and you were excited to listen because it's a history before you were there. And it's like, and I was saying to you, like, I could walk up there now and I'd probably get lost, even though the streets are the same place, and AI can't experience that interaction that you and I had. It wouldn't understand it. And it wouldn't.
And the passion for certain parts of that conversation. Oh, you remember this cinema that used to be? Oh, yeah, I remember that cinema. Yeah,
Yeah, because I said to you about the I can't remember the name of the church, but it's where the the nursery
Lemon
rhyme.
skirts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know if it's St. Clements. That's the problem, but it's orange and lemons. Yeah, it is St. Clements. Orange and lemons say the bells of St. Clements, and it was a nursery rhyme that I grew up with, and that church is off Kingsland Road, and it's those things, and we've talked about Spitalfields Market, Brick Lane, Petticoat Lane, Flower Lane, all of these things from a time that I remember in the 90s and the early noughties, and you're like, oh, actually, I know that, and there's these connections. You can't combine that with AI. I couldn't have that conversation with AI. It's too polite, I suppose, for want of a better term.
Yeah, it would be very neutral. It would probably be like, oh yes, Dalston, the famous place where such and such poet
Yeah,
was born. And it would be very like, I don't know, it would be like trying to talk to a politician who doesn't really want to give their real thoughts
yeah.
on something.
It'd almost be the conversational equivalent of lift music.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, Muzak.
Yeah. Just being mindful of time, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask everybody, but I'm going to give you two lots of questions, but on the same theme. So, using your imagination, I want you to just basically, it's the time machine concept. Okay, you can go anywhere in history, anytime. Why would you go there? Where would you go, and why? What car would you drive, and what music would you be listening to?
Well, something important to know is that I can't actually drive. I am
It's a magical world. You can do whatever you want.
Okay. Well, in that case, I would drive a hovercraft.
Yep.
Across the sand dunes to find out, listening to Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Yep.
Trying to find out how the Egyptians built the pyramids.
Nice.
Because we still don't really have a definitive answer.
We don't know. No, it's true. Because, despite whatever, the problem is nobody can agree on nobody knows. So they've come up with a story, and one half of archaeology is holding on to it for dear life. And the other half of archaeology is like, dude, come on. You're just going to have to come up with, you're just going to have to confess. So the same principle for the same question, but marketing and advertising. If you could go back to any time in history for marketing and advertising, where would you go, and who for, and why?
I think about this sometimes, actually. So it's funny you answer the question, or you ask the question. A time that really interests me is like around the 1900s. The time where advertising, if I can say this, was a little bit less commercial. It was very much like you would see an advert that had no pictures in it. It would just be words, and it would be like Dr. Simmons magic, coughing formula or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the kind of when it started.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be so much selling the product as just saying, here's the product, and you can buy it here for this much. And I always wonder, like, okay, well, what if you applied modern advertising, or at least what we know about advertising and how to reach people now, and modern testing philosophies to advertising like that? Would it be more effective, or would it be less effective? Because maybe at the time, that's all you needed to do to sell a product. You just need to say, hey, here's this product. You can buy it right here. I don't know. So that's something that I would be really interested in knowing is essentially, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it's an ego thing, but how good of an advertiser or a copywriter would I be if I was transported 100 years, prior and was tasked with having to sell certain products? It's an interesting question to ponder.
I like that, because I'm always fascinated when I read the story of L'Oreal for because I'm worth it. It's actually narrowed down from a longer phrase, the original. For those early marketers, like post-war, sort of 50s and 60s, when that advertising was a mixture of radio, print, and TV, and was hugely competitive. coming up with that phrase, because I'm worth it, was, there's just everything like that, where it come from, how it was established and stuff. I loved the history of that, and where those principles come from. And when you read about the early pioneers in advertising, and for print especially, because magazines and newspapers were so important, and it effectively had a greater reach in terms of return on investment than TV, and it could be more localized. The way that those people understood how to reach someone, because I suppose in a sense you didn't have that drunken theory, because they weren't. Because I've discussed this with Carlton on a podcast that he and I do, and I'm sorry for dragging this on a bit longer, but
no, I'm enjoying.
When I was younger, you would get like your weekly magazines, fortnightly magazines, monthly magazines, and it would be kind of part of your pocket money and allowance sort of thing. But I might read that same magazine 20 times because I didn't have anything else to do. And you'd start a magazine when it first turned up by flicking through your favourite bits. And then by the time you got to the end of the day or the next, you might even stagger when you can read it. But eventually you start reading the adverts because it's the only bit of the magazine you haven't consumed. And that was a very different time, because people weren't competing for your attention in the same way.
It's funny, actually. I remember even in my own lifetime, I mean, I'm not that old, I'm only 26, but even in my own lifetime, I can remember when I was younger, at the time we were living in South Africa. And so the internet connection wasn't so good in our house at the time. We could only really get it on the ground floor and kind of near the living room area and stuff. So upstairs,
the early days were great, weren't they?
Yeah. It wasn't dial-up exactly, but it wasn't too far off, I suppose. But you couldn't really get it in the top floors, and particularly on one side of the house where there was one of the bathrooms, you couldn't get it. So you couldn't like go on your phone. And of course, this was still back in the days of like sliding phones and stuff. So it wasn't like iPhones where you could just go, it was easy to navigate the internet. It was a little bit cumbersome on those flip phones and stuff. So we just used to have a stack of books in the bathroom, and for me it was Calvin and Hobbes books.
Brilliant! One of the best ever cartoon strips. Calvin and Hobbes is effing amazing. I've got some of the books above me on the shelf.
And we just had this stack of Calvin and Hobbes books. I just flip through, when I'm on the loo or whatever, if I can say that I would just flip through these books and read them, and I would just read them and reread them and do the exact same thing which you're talking about just now. Like, you've read, how the comic ends, you've seen this particular strip, many times, but you still read it anyway, and
the
you enjoy
psychology in Calvin and Hobbes is phenomenal. And his nemesis Susie. Poor Susie. And his poor suffering parents.
It's funny. I think I attribute reading Calvin and Hobbes books to perhaps why I lent naturally towards essay writing and English language and literature in school, because although it's a comic strip, it's a comic, and it's about this kind of 6-year-old boy and his little stuffed tiger kind of thing. It's the language isn't exactly like elementary school level. Like, sometimes it can be a little bit complex, and so there were a lot of times where I'd like come across a word, I wouldn't know what it meant, and I had to go look it up. And so it helped kind of, when I was 11, helped expand my vocabulary that way. And perhaps that's why maybe I lent more into writing, and why it came a bit more naturally to me when it came time to write a lot of essays in school.
One of the things, I mean, Calvin and Hobbes, I got introduced to it by a housemate. It was his favourite thing. And one of the things I love, not just the way that the person that wrote Calvin and Hobbes looks at the world is phenomenal, but you got that relationship between him and his pet tiger, and Hobbes, obviously, him and Hobbes, which is very adult-like. But the relationship with his parents is very childlike. And to pull that off in the same strip, the cohesion, it's just amazing. It's just absolutely phenomenal.
And his ability to kind of like imagine these scenarios where like he
Is
is
it
this fighter
Zorg?
pilot. Yeah, he's a fighter pilot on this like, foreign planet and stuff,
Yeah.
and then you realize it's just him like being trying to be fed by his mom or something.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he acts like he's protecting the planet as he's being
Yeah.
attacked, and it's just his mum trying to get him in the bath or something, or
Yeah.
feed
Yeah.
him, and so yeah. That's probably a great place to finish. I really appreciate your time, Alex. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. I really enjoyed it.
And there you go. And that was Alex. And it was interesting, for all the things we fear about AI, you can't replace a human. At least I don't believe so, not just yet. As always, I do appreciate your support. Thank you for watching. I appreciate the likes, the comments. They're always welcome. And wherever you are, whatever you believe, please take care and be blessed.